Hi again then guys, and welcome to another GT Sport 1.50 tune, of course, this time a drift tune rather than a circuit build for the Toyota 86. This is of course the newer one, the facelifted model, and I would recommend this as a drift tune maybe for people who aren't as seasoned at drifting, maybe are more of a beginner, or just don't really drift all that often. It's something that's a bit more easy to use than like the Turn 14 BRZ with 1,000 horsepower. At the same time though, maybe if you're not super into drifting but you want to, for example, unlock the 1,000,000 point drift achievement in the game, then you could use something like this to get a lot of points. Now, as far as the tuning goes, of course with drifting, it doesn't matter too much as far as power and weight in terms of regulations because they don't tend to be as many, so you can pretty much do whatever you want. I've dropped the weight as low as it can go and increased the power as much as it can be, so that's what I've done, of course. You don't have to do the same, so I'll leave that down to you. Traction control is of course turned off. That goes without saying, you kind of have to do that. As far as the tyres, we've got comfort hards front and rear. I know that different drifters like to use different things. Sometimes even I do, for instance like softs on the front, hard on the back. For this one I find that works better. The brake balance is another thing that a lot of people who are super into drifting and do it a lot will, for instance, want to change up a little bit. And as a general rule, if you move it more towards the rear in terms of balance, then that allows you to lock up the rear wheels a little bit more easily, especially if you turn off ABS, of course, and that helps to initiate a drift. I prefer to do throttle-based drifting, so just like throw the car into the corner, don't really use the handbrake or brakes all that much as far as the drift itself goes. So that depends on what you want. It depends on your drifting style as well, because there are many different ways to achieve the same thing. As far as the suspension, we've got the lowest ride height on the front. I've just got it 5mm higher on the back, just for that front end trajectory into a corner. You don't have to do that though. As far as the frequency, we've got those as stiff as they can be, and that allows you to have the dampers as soft as they can be. So the car has a little bit of a bounce to it, but it's more rigid. As far as the anti-roll, that's also as soft as it can go, but the car doesn't really wallow around that much because of how stiff the springs are. As far as the camber, we've got the highest on the front and then 2 degrees on the back. The rear camber, of course, is not as important on a drift car. It is important, but it's not as important as the front end. So you can change those if you want to. Maybe see if maybe 5 on the front and 1 on the back, something like that. Test it out, see which works better for you, which you prefer. And as far as toe, what I've done, as you can see, is 0.15 toe out on the front. And that allows you to have a little bit more range in the steering when you go full lock to lock. But what you can also do, if you want the car to be a bit more tail happy on the straights even, so it's like fishtailing more, then you could toe out the back as well. But be careful with that because you can easily make the car just want to spin into a circle every time, just do a donut. So, as I said, be careful with that. Downforce, of course, is not adjustable. For the diff, of course, it will be totally different for different people depending on your drift style. For me, this works perfectly, which is the maximum initial torque, the lowest acceleration, and then halfway on braking. I'm sure there are tons of different opinions on diff tuning, and there's no real wrong or right answer because everyone has a different style of drifting. Some prefer the e-brake, some prefer to brake, some just throw it in like I do and use the throttle. So it depends on your style, really. And finally, for the gearbox, of course, this is with full power, so I would recommend the fully customized transmission, obviously. Then as far as the auto setting, I've got 162 miles an hour. Then what I've done for the gears themselves is first is on 2675, so almost all the way to the right, and that's to help you get off the line a little bit more quickly. Then second and third are much longer, and that allows you to stay in second and third gear, especially if you're using a manual gearbox, for much longer. So you can basically just hold a drift all the way through a corner in either second or third gear, depending on the speed of the corner. So then fourth is a little bit closer, and fifth and sixth especially are much, much closer. So you've got some top-end speed, but of course it's not too important for a drift car anyway. And then the final drive, as you can see, is 4.3. So all that remains, of course, is to actually take it out on a track so that you can see what this can do in action. Now, I'll probably splice together some of the footage because I did 2 laps of drifting here at Suzuka just so that you can see what this car can do in corners, the kind of angles it can get. And again, as I've said before, I'm not a huge drifter, especially in Gran Turismo. The physics don't suit me too much, but even regardless of that, I'm not the biggest of drifting fans anyway. So if you are a drifter, give it a try, see if you like it. I mean, if you're seasoned, chances are you do your own tuning anyway, but if you are a beginner, give this one a try. It's very easy to drift. I would recommend for higher speed drift corners, such as at the start of Suzuka, like after the start-finish line, slow it down a little bit earlier, because this isn't one of those cars where you need to be going crazy fast to drift. It will drift regardless of the speed. So try to enter a corner at like 40 or 50 miles an hour. That's more than good enough most of the time, and then you'll be able to hold it pretty nicely. Throttle control is very easy. In fact, a lot of the time you can just give it full throttle because you've only got 300 horsepower anyway. It's very easy to use, as I said, so if you do decide to check this one out, regardless of the weight and the power and all the settings that you choose, I hope that you find this to be a beneficial base, a canvas, if you will, to work from. Frankenstein it up, add your own preferences in there, change it up if you want to, more or less camber, different diff settings, more or less power, all that kind of good stuff. And of course, tell me down below if you did enjoy it. If you want to check out my other drift tunes as well, you can click here on screen. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.